Never trust the movie version of World War II bombers, because the real story is way louder, way scarier, and way more brutal than people think. When you hear World War II bomber, you probably picture one plane and one famous scene. But the truth is, different countries built totally different flying monsters for totally different jobs. Night raids, daylight attacks, ship hunting, city bombing, and even one-way missions near the end. And some of these planes became legends, not because they were perfect, but because they changed how the war was fought. Here's the problem. World War II bombers are easy to misunderstand. People talk about them like they were just big planes that dropped bombs, but that skips the hardest part: getting to the target and coming back. Imagine climbing into a metal tube at minus freezing temperatures, no heat, no comfort, with flak exploding around you like angry black fireworks, while enemy fighters circle like sharks. And here's the twist. The best bomber wasn't always the one with the biggest bomb load. Sometimes the most iconic bomber was iconic because it survived, or because it scared the enemy, or because it could hit a target nobody else could reach. So today, we're going to walk through the most iconic bombers of World War II. What made them famous, what made them terrifying, and what it must have felt like to be inside them. And as we go, keep this question in your head. If you had to fly one mission in one of these planes, which one would you choose? The Boeing B-29 Flying Fortress, USA. Let's start with the one almost everyone recognizes, the B-29. The nickname Flying Fortress wasn't a cute marketing line. This thing was covered in guns, nose, tail, top, sides. The idea was simple. If fighters attack, you shoot back from every angle. Now here's the scary part people forget. Early on, B-29 crews flew deep into enemy territory in daylight. Daylight sounds safer, right? You can see where you're going. But daylight also means the enemy sees you too, clearly. So what did it look like from the inside? You're strapped in. The engines are loud enough to rattle your bones. You're watching other bombers around you like a moving city in the sky. Then the flak starts. Black puffs that suddenly aren't puffs anymore. They're metal tearing through the air. The B-29 is famous for coming home shot to pieces. And you'll see photos of B-17s with chunks missing. Tail half gone, holes everywhere. Still landing. That's not luck. That's strong design, tough crews, and a plane that could take punishment. But it wasn't magic. Crews still died in huge numbers. The B-17 became iconic because it represents the brutal idea of daylight bombing, precision on paper, chaos in the sky. If you ever travel to air museums in the US or Europe, when you stand under a B-17, it hits you. The plane looks big, but the crew spaces are tight and uncomfortable. You realize fast, this was not a ride, this was survival. The consolidated B-24 Liberator, USA. Now, if the B-17 is the celebrity, the B-24 Liberator is the workhorse that doesn't get enough love. It had a weird-looking body and those long Davis wing shapes that helped it fly farther. The B-24 could carry a heavy load and had great range, which mattered a lot in places like the Atlantic, North Africa, and the Pacific. But here's a detail that creates tension immediately. Many crews said the B-24 was harder to escape if it went down. Its design could turn into a trap in certain crash situations, especially if it hit water badly. And still, the B-24 flew everywhere. It hunted submarines. It bombed oil fields and rail lines. It did long missions where turning back wasn't really an option. Imagine being hours away from safety, an engine starts coughing, and you're over enemy territory or cold ocean. You don't just land, you either fix it in the air, or you hope. The B-24 became iconic because it shows the real math of war. You don't just need a famous plane. You need a plane you can build a lot of and send everywhere. The Avro Lancaster, Britain. If the American story is often daylight bombing, the British bomber story is heavily tied to the night, especially with the Avro Lancaster. The Lancaster is legendary because it could carry massive bomb loads, including the really heavy ones that other planes struggled with. and it's tied to one of the most famous bombing stories of the war, the bouncing bomb raids against dams. Even if you've heard about it, picture how insane it was. Night flying, low altitude, enemy defenses, strict speed and height. Mess up by a little, and you crash or you fail. But Lancaster missions were often long night raids over Germany, where the sky wasn't dark. It was lit by searchlights and explosions. A searchlight finds you. It locks on. Suddenly you're the center of attention. You feel exposed, like someone grabbed you by the shirt in a crowd. Flak starts walking toward you. Fighters show up. And your plane is heavy, full of fuel and bombs. The Lancaster became iconic because it's tied to Britain's nighttime bombing campaign and the idea of carrying the war deep into enemy territory when invasion wasn't possible yet. The Handley Page Halifax and Short Stirling, Britain. Quick reality check. Britain didn't only have the Lancaster. The Halifax did huge amounts of work. Bombing, supply drops, towing gliders. It doesn't get the same spotlight, but it was there, again and again. The Short Stirling was Britain's first four-engine heavy bomber, but it had limits, especially in altitude. And altitude mattered because higher often meant safer from some defenses. Picture being in a bomber that can't climb high enough while flak reaches up like invisible fists. That changes how you fly, when you fly, and what targets you can risk. These planes are iconic in a quieter way. They show how a country builds and adapts fast, even when the early designs aren't perfect. The de Havilland Mosquito, Britain. The wooden wonder. Now let's switch styles completely. The Mosquito looks like it shouldn't be real. It was fast, it was light, and a lot of it was made from wood. Most bombers tried to survive by carrying guns and armor. The Mosquito often survived by being so fast that catching it was a nightmare. Think about the confidence required to fly into dangerous airspace with fewer guns, basically saying, if you see me, I'm already gone. It did bombing, scouting, pathfinding, and precision strikes. The Mosquito became iconic because it broke the usual rules. It proved speed and smart design could sometimes replace brute force. The Boeing B-29 Superfortress, USA. Now we have to talk about the B-29, because this plane is a whole different level. It wasn't just another bomber. It was a high-tech project, pressurized cabin sections, advanced systems, and huge range. And it became forever linked to the end of the war in the Pacific. But before we jump to the famous part, here's the dangerous truth. Early B-29 engines were trouble. They could overheat and catch fire. And an engine fire in a bomber is not a normal fire. It's a monster. You're over ocean, far from land, and you smell burning. You can't pull over. You can't stop. You fight the fire while the plane keeps moving, and every second feels like it's counting down. The B-29 is iconic because it represents distance and reach, hitting targets from far bases, changing what safe even means in war. The German Heinkel He 111, Germany. Let's move to the other side. The Heinkel He 111 is one of the most recognizable German bombers of the early war, especially tied to the Blitz and the early campaigns. It wasn't a huge heavy bomber like the later Allied ones. Germany leaned hard into medium bombers and tactical support, hitting targets closer to the front. Early in the war, when German bombers were pushing across Europe, civilians heard the engines before they saw the planes. That sound became fear. The He 111 is iconic because it represents the early phase of the war. Fast advances, air attacks tied to ground movement, and bombing used as a shock weapon. The Junkers Ju-88, Germany. If Germany had a do-it-all bomber, the Ju-88 is a top contender. It could bomb, dive bomb, attack ships, and even get used in other roles. It was fast and flexible, which is exactly what a fast-moving war demanded. A flexible plane means you can be reassigned quickly. One week you're hitting supply lines, next week you're hunting ships, then you're flying in totally different conditions. That constant shift messes with training, planning, and nerves. The Ju-88 became iconic because it was everywhere and could do so many jobs. Not the flashiest, but extremely important. The Junkers Ju-87 Stuka, Germany. The dive bomber icon. Even if you don't know planes, you probably know the Stuka sound. The siren scream. The Ju-87 is iconic because it made fear part of the weapon. Dive bombing is already intense. You point the nose down steeply, dive toward the ground, release bombs, then pull up hard. Pulling out too late means you don't pull out at all. The Stuka became a symbol of early German air power, especially when the enemy didn't yet have strong air defenses. Later in the war, it struggled more when fighters and anti-air got stronger. But as an icon, it's burned into history. The Soviet Pe-2 and Il-4, USSR. Now let's talk about the Eastern Front, because it was a different planet. The Soviet Union used bombers like the Petlyakov Pe-2, a fast dive bomber medium bomber type, and the Ilyushin Il-4 for longer-range missions. Eastern Front air war was brutal. Weather, distance, and non-stop pressure. You're flying in extreme cold, visibility is bad, and you're still expected to hit moving targets and survive enemy fighters. Mistakes happen fast, and sometimes the enemy is the conditions. These Soviet bombers are iconic because they show how the air war wasn't only about famous Western planes. The Eastern Front demanded endurance and sheer stubborn survival. Japan's Mitsubishi G4M Betty, Japan. In the Pacific, Japanese bombers had a deadly reputation too, especially the Mitsubishi G4M, often called Betty by the Allies. It had long range, which mattered over the ocean, but the trade-off was scary. It often lacked protection like armor and self-sealing fuel tanks, which made it vulnerable. If a plane is vulnerable, every single tracer round feels like a coin toss with death. One hit in the wrong place and the whole situation changes instantly. The G4M became iconic because it represents that range versus survival trade. Over the Pacific, range is power, but it can come at a price. The North American B-29 Mitchell, USA. If you want a bomber story that sounds fake but is real, the B-29 is the one. It's tied to the Doolittle raid, American bombers launching from an aircraft carrier to hit Japan early in the war. Just imagine that. A medium bomber taking off from a carrier deck. That's not normal. Taking off is already the riskiest part of flight. Now do it from a short deck, loaded heavy, knowing you probably can't come back to that carrier. The B-29 became iconic because it represents guts, surprise, and a morale punch. It also did a ton of work across many theaters, but that one moment stamped its name into history. The Douglas A-20, Havoc, and the Martin B-26 Marauder, USA. Two more American names deserve attention. The A-20 was used as a light bomber and attack aircraft. Fast, aggressive, often low-level, meaning you're closer to guns on the ground. Low-level bombing means you feel every bullet as a possibility, because you're not high above danger. You're inside it. The B-26 Marauder had a rough, early reputation. Some called it a widowmaker because it demanded careful handling, especially on takeoff and landing. But once crews mastered it, it became very effective and had strong survival rates later. Iconic doesn't always mean easy. Sometimes iconic means the plane punished mistakes until crews learned how to tame it. Italy's Savoia Marchetti SM-79, Italy. Italy's SM-79 is one of the most iconic torpedo bombers of the war. Torpedo bombing is terrifying. You have to fly low and straight toward ships, basically offering yourself up, so your torpedo enters the water correctly. Flying straight is exactly what you don't want to do in combat, but it's what the mission demands. You're exposed, and you know it. The SM-79 became iconic because it represents that naval air war danger. A thin line between hitting a ship and getting erased from the sky. Why these bombers became legends. So what makes a bomber iconic? It's not just stats. It's story. The B-17 is iconic for toughness and the image of daylight formations taking flak head-on. The Lancaster is iconic for heavy night raids and massive payload missions. The B-29 is iconic for range, technology, and being tied to the war's final shock. The Ju-88 is iconic for flexibility, doing everything Germany needed in the air. The Stuka is iconic for turning fear into a weapon. The G4M is iconic as a warning. Range is useless if you can't survive the trip. The B-25 is iconic for boldness and surprise. And here's something people rarely say out loud. Bomber history is also about civilians, cities, and the hard moral weight of air war. The planes are machines, but what they did was real, and the damage didn't disappear when the engines shut off. When you visit World War II sites today, airfields, museums, memorials, you can feel how close history still is. A runway is just concrete, until you remember what took off from it at night, and who didn't come back. Alright, if we had to pick the moment where bombers truly became the symbol of modern war, it's this. When the war reached the point where countries weren't only fighting armies, they were fighting factories, fuel, rail lines, ports, and entire city systems. Bombers turned the sky into a second battlefield. And once that happened, no place felt fully safe. Not the front line, not the capital, not the ocean route, not even deep inland. And the craziest part? Every side believed they had to do it, because if they didn't, the enemy would. That's the moment bombers stop being planes and start being history's loudest argument. So when you hear the most iconic bombers of World War II, don't just picture metal and bombs. Picture crews freezing at high altitude, counting minutes over enemy territory. Picture searchlights grabbing planes out of the dark. Picture engines on fire over open ocean. Picture the fear of flying straight at ships with a torpedo. Picture the noise, the pressure, the long flight home, and the empty seats after a mission. These bombers became icons because they carried the war across distance, across borders, coastlines, and night skies. And they changed what war looked like forever. Subscribe and watch the next video.